Well, morning all, and welcome back. News of the day. This is kind of why 2 years ago, when the channel was much smaller, I wouldn't report on injury news. I just stayed away from it because there were so many injuries and so many guys returning and leaving. I do my best to keep up on it as much as I can, but I can't. There's no way. There's just so many that happen at this time of year. That being said, if you're a fan of Moran in Philadelphia, you're not going to see him the rest of the year. He has a torn ACL, so he's out for the season. Uh, at least with Philadelphia, they have defensive depth, so that's to their benefit. But they're going to miss him. So yeah, it's absolute shame. His season's over. On the Toronto front, Mike Babcock has reached 700 wins. I believe they said he's the eighth coach to ever reach that number. Mike Babcock, a guy who is a very divisive figure among Toronto fans and likely among hockey fans in general, where you can point out some successes, you can point out some failures. I'm not really on one side or the other about him. I think he's a good coach. I think he does a good job. I also think there's certain things he does behind the bench in Toronto that leave me scratching my head, but it's his job. He knows how to run that locker room and how to run things on the ice. And I just don't presume to know better than he does about how to run the lineup and who to put on what line. So yeah, 700 wins. We'll see how many more he gets in Toronto. Jean-Gabriel Pageau is having a very good season. Ottawa fans will tell you about his excellent plus minus on a team that's really poor. His ability to play the defensive side of the game is fantastic because this is also a contract year. So when a guy's having a really good year during a contract year, look out. It does mean he can increase the amount that he's asking for in his contract. He may do that. I don't know. Pageau seemed not quite as me as he is team centered over his career, but he can definitely make a mint this coming summer. We'll see how the rest of the year progresses, but he is a heart and soul guy. And so for Ottawa, I think it's important to keep guys like that in the locker room during this rebuild. Brian Little has perforated eardrum and vertigo symptoms as well. The vertigo symptoms, hopefully, those heal up because we've seen players before that once you get those kinds of symptoms, it can be really, really tough to shake that. So hopefully he ends up being okay. But yeah, he's out for an unknown period of time, completely indefinite right now, and that's really bad news for Winnipeg because he was really a spark plug out there. He had been really, really important for them, and now he's out of the lineup. Nathan MacKinnon, it doesn't sound like the upper body injury that forced him out of that game last night is going to keep him out for long, if it keeps him out at all. They weren't saying to this point whether or not he's going to miss any action. But it sounds like it's day-to-day at worst, and Zadorov's supposed to be as well. So last night, kind of scary when you see your best players get injured, but, Colorado's going through this early, and hopefully everybody gets healthy later on, and this is just remembered as that patch where everybody got hurt. Speaking of injuries, and again, this is that time of year, minimum of 4 weeks for Steen with a high ankle sprain. High ankle sprain just reminds me what Nate Burleson said last week about how that can mean it's broken. So sometimes high ankle sprain means, you broke it, but we're not going to say broken. We're going to call it that. We're going to call it a high ankle sprain. So hopefully Steen's all right and gets the proper care taken with it between now and then. St. Louis has their depth challenged again, but we saw last year in the playoffs when their depth is challenged, they step up pretty well. Jalen Chatfield's been called up by the Canucks. Tanev is likely out of the lineup then, which means Fattenberg will likely get to play. And I didn't even see reporting on Tanev being hurt. So I'm just throwing that in there. Tanev's hurt. And maybe it doesn't make news because they're like, oh, this is probably old. Tanev got hurt. Yeah, Tanev gets hurt every year. So he's getting that out of the way in November as well. So hopefully it's just a day-to-day thing. And not a long-term thing, but it does test their depth as well. Tanev with Hughes has been fantastic. Now, Jordy Ben probably moves up into that spot. I like Jordy Ben, but not as a top four defenseman, so hopefully Tanev's not out for very long. I was also reading through ESPN has buy sell predictions, meaning that you tell them a headline and would you buy this headline or would you sell it, and they had stuff about whether or not the Islanders can keep this up and whether or not the Devils or the Rangers can make the playoffs. I try to avoid just flat out making that kind of a prediction because, in all honesty, I just think it's very, very early, and we get caught up in, okay, like for instance, are the Oilers a playoff team? I don't know. You asked me that question, you say, all right, Shannon, buy or sell? Oilers a playoff team. I'd be like, maybe? Because, yeah, I see depth issues up front, but I also see McDavid and Draisaitl, and if there's any tandem in the NHL that can drag a team to a playoff spot, it's them. And so, yeah, I'm kind of on the fence with that. And I get the whole thing. I try not to buy into it. I found that I did that more in the channel's beginnings, and then it would lead to just more arguing and complaining, and it wasn't really something that I thought was beneficial to the growth of the channel, and I didn't think that was how I wanted to go with it. So I try to make sure that when it comes to making conclusions, other than when I do power rankings or when I'm, discussing who my favorites and least favorites are and all this kind of thing, and to some extent in the reviews, I try to avoid making grand predictions about how the season's going to go. Season previews even, I've kind of started saying, this team could finish as high as second and as low as fourth. That's where I see them finishing, kind of, sort of. So I get it. And again, it gets done for clicks, right? So that's the way that works. I'm on the fence. I had to laugh too. They've also got on ESPN, they've also got a link to the NHL's survey of players, and 72% of players aren't tired of Gritty. They don't think Gritty's been overdone. Which means there's 28% of players that are like, yeah, no, we're tired of this. That's kind of funny. And if Gritty hears that, he'll just be more obnoxious. To those 28% of players, he'll probably find a way to find out who said some bad stuff about him, and he'll probably have some words for them. By which I mean not actual words. And they asked about the drug issue in the NHL, and what I found interesting with that, and I know it's not on the board, but what I found interesting with that was that a lot of the players, this was all anonymous comments, so it's not like John Carlson said or Quinn Hughes said or anything like that. It was just random anonymous comments that I think it was 10% felt there was a problem when it came to recreational drug use in the NHL, and a lot of them said our team doesn't have that. If there are players on this team that do that kind of thing, we don't see it. Maybe it's during the summer, but in general, we don't do that. The one thing I've always thought with hockey players is it is a busy grind during the regular season. You don't have a lot of time to do a lot of recreational drug use that couldn't potentially end up having a negative impact on your next game. So, it's one of those conversations that I think we will continue to have when things come up, when guys fail tests and whatnot. But in general, I've always wondered if the problem is as bad as some think it is, and if we just get colored by how things were in the 80s, that we go, yeah, no, it's got to still be the same. I don't think that it's as big an issue for the players. I don't think the NHL views it as a big issue. So for people who want to see like rules changed and tests changed and they should be more strict with enforcing this, it's not going to happen. When you've got 10% of the players saying there's a problem in the NHL going, we don't have a problem, nothing's going to change. On the Tampa Bay front for today's game, Victor Hedman is back. So as expected, that's kind of an as expected return from injury. And they're still seen as the best team in the Atlantic, again, according to what I was reading on ESPN. And just in general, the feeling you get, everybody seems to have this attitude with Tampa, like, they're going to turn it around. Yeah, I know they're off to a slow start. Yeah, Kucherov's off to a slow start, and Stamkos, they'll turn it around. Now they'll get it. They're still the best team in the division. They'll figure it out. And almost every year we'll have a team that people are all like, they'll get it. And then you reach the end of the year and you go, wait, They didn't get it. So the assumption that they'll just turn it on, like last year, it was Winnipeg. They had a slow second half of the season. They weren't playing particularly well. And towards the end of the season, there was a lot of, once the playoffs start, and then they were out in the first round. So if the assumption is, well, Tampa's going to turn around, if Tampa believes that, they're in trouble. But starting today against Buffalo, and then tomorrow they have the back half of that Buffalo series in Stockholm, maybe they turn around. Maybe they win both. They come home feeling pretty good, and the next thing you know, they're back in first place. Because I don't think, while Boston's off to an amazing start, I don't think they're uncatchable by any means. And yeah, it's an interesting division for sure. But let me know what you guys think. Can Tampa turn it around and still finish first? Do you guys still see them as the team to defeat in order to be seen as the best in the Atlantic? Or did they just play really, really well last year and they're not going to be able to do that this year? That they're going to have that down year, because that's kind of what sort of happens. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.